ये दर्द रहेगा बन के दवा तुम सब्र करो वक्त आने दो.
Tigo, Jazakallah, jump over back to Hamza. Hamza, over to you, man.
Ruby Saab, can do it next week if you want, man. Yeah, I was listening to Sabur talk, man. I don't want to listen to myself talk now.
I can hear him talk all day, mashallah. So I wanted to bring him in. But yeah, we want to hear you talk as well.
He's just gonna bore everyone after Sabur's talk, man.
Nah,
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So again, just recapping from the God Summit, which was obviously that took place a couple of weeks ago. One thing that a lot of the Murabbiyan stressed was about the idea of prophecy and how it's one of the most powerful proofs of the existence of God, i.e., someone foretelling something years before it happens, and reason tells you it can't be by coincidence or chance, and then that event occurs some point later in time. And looking more recently, after the time of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, one of the most powerful proofs for the truthfulness of the Prophet ﷺ was the plague that took place in the Punjab from 1898 to about 1906, 1907. So just the background, I know from books and stuff that we've been through, a lot of this is familiar knowledge to everyone, but just really briefly, as we know, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, before his claim to be the Imam Mahdi and the Prophet Messiah, a lot of his work was infamous in a positive manner around Qadian, around India in that time, especially his first few volumes of Rahim Ahmadiyya. And many scholars of the time prior to his claim published a lot of praise and admiration for him, especially people like Muhammad Hussein Batalwi and a few others as well. Then when he made his claim that Jesus Islam had died a natural death and that he was spiritually the second coming of Hazrat Isa Islam, overnight that positivity, that fame turned very negative. And then those who praised him became his enemies, his objectifiers, and his name became quite negatively maligned and vilified throughout India. And then throughout this time, we know thousands of revelations that the Prophet ﷺ received with warnings to those who disbelieve and to those who oppose him, so to speak. One such warning again was related to the plague, and this is the initial warning came just after 1894 when the eclipse of the sun and the moon happened. And this is the beginning of the prophecy. I think I've said it before previously, and I think in his own words, a warner came unto the world, but the world accepted him not. Yet God shall manifest his favor and demonstrate his truth with powerful assaults. This plague, which I'll go into in a second, is also prophesied in the Quran as well. It shows the truth of revelation. And transfer of knowledge from the unknown to the known. Cool. So this is the verse we're talking about. So from chapter 27, verse 83, and when the sentence is passed against them, we shall bring forth out of the earth, which shall which shall wound them. I think it's because people did not believe in our signs. So just background, Dabba refers to all animals, so any life form from the smallest to the largest, anything that moves along the earth, basically. Many Muslim scholars and commentators after the time of the Holy Prophet ﷺ all sort of said that this prophecy will relate to the time when the Imam Mahdi will appear in the world. These are just some examples of those scholars. Ismail Haqi al-Baruzwi Sahib, he stated that the Mahdi would come and that the Dajjal would appear, followed by the Messiah. During this time, Dabba, i.e. that insect, that animal, will emerge, and after that, the sun will rise from the west. Another scholar as well related again to this prophecy on the time of the Imam Mahdi. So 1898 was the first revelation of the prophecy about the plague, and it was published by the Jamaat al-Hakam and a few of the newspapers at that time about how this impending doom will occur across India, but especially in the Punjab. And that this calamity, the Prophet ﷺ explains, is related to this insect, this animal that crawls on the floors of the earth. And then to the bit about the tukallimu, it also means two things. One is to wound, and the other is to speak. This animal which will bite. So we know it was an insect bite that causes these things, for having rejected the signs of Allah and rejecting the Promised Sallallahu this was the prophecy itself. Angels of God are planting black trees in different places of the Punjab. These plants are very ugly, black, frightening, and stunted. I asked the person planting these trees, what kind of trees are these? He replied that these were plague trees, which was spread in the country very shortly. So again, just a bit of background. 1894 was the eclipses of the sun and the moon. 1897, the plague started in Bombay. And at that time, healthcare workers and doctors said that it had been well controlled and there'll be no problems with the plague. Then it broke out in 1898, and doctors again assured everyone that that it was well controlled and there would be no problems. Again, Prophet ﷺ disagreed with this, and we know from history that this devastation continued for approximately 7 to 9 years. Yeah, Qadian specifically, obviously, was the village of the Prophet ﷺ, and he said that it would strike everywhere in Qadian, all the villages in and around the Punjab, but it would not enter the four walls of the home of the Prophet ﷺ. And the prophecy was, "I will save all who dwell in this house." This doesn't just mean the physical house, but obviously the spiritual house, i.e., all of the Jamaat, all of those true followers of the Prophet ﷺ. But there is a bit of footnote. So Ahmadis who weren't doing the true ibadat in the sense of following the 10 conditions of birth, some Ahmadis would still suffer. But the comparison between non-Ahmadis versus Ahmadis who would suffer would be between night and day. It'd be incomparable. It'd be far less deaths from Ahmadis versus those who weren't a part of the Jamaat. And again, those opponents, those enemies of the Prophet ﷺ, they would challenge him, saying that he would actually die of the plague. But one by one, all of those who made these accusations, they would all be stricken by the plague and they would all pass away. Again, I'll get to the stats later, but there's a massive, large margin between, even in the mixed villages, between those Ahmadis who survived and those non-Ahmadis who survived, and there's no comparison between the two. And in some villages, it would get to some extent that only Ahmadis were able to actually bury those people who were dying from the plague, because other people, non-Ahmadis, had literally been wiped out from those villages, from those areas. And despite fear of contracting the plague, because obviously even when the people had passed away, they were still infectious. You could still catch the plague from those people. The Ahmadis would continue to do this job of finding the dead, putting them in the coffins and burying them, because they had such conviction, such faith from Islam, that they wouldn't contract the plague from these people. One example was Maulvi Muhammad Ali Saab. He was actually an Ahmadi, and he suffered really bad symptoms of the plague, sweating, fever, swelling of various glands around his body. And then he tried various medical aid, and there was no effect of this aid. He was in great agony. He was very worried, more than anything else, that Allah had almost seen him as maybe not worthy of being a proper Ahmadi, because he'd obviously accepted the Jamaat, but he was still suffering from the plague. So the Prophet ﷺ was made aware of his quite negative, his bad condition at the time. So in that time frame, again, put yourself in the picture where everything's so infectious and contagious at that time. The Prophet ﷺ went to his house, went to his home, and he looked after him at that time and reassured him that he would not die of the plague. In that same instance, Muhammad Ali Saab, he made a rapid recovery. The temperature that he had subsided, and he made a miraculous recovery. He went on to die years after, when he was 77 in 1951. So it just shows that even by his hands, we see it a little bit with Hazur as well. Even by the touch of the Prophet ﷺ, he led to miraculous recoveries for some of his followers. It's a bit difficult for those who will ask for the best sort of evidence, because we know all the witnesses were either Ahmadi versus non-Ahmadi at that time. You had the Christians, the Hindus, the non-Ahmadi Muslims who were very much against Prophet ﷺ in India. So they will ask, where's the non-Ahmadi sources? Where's the evidence there? But the best evidence you can really give in favor of the Jamaat is that at that time there was a lot of negative anti-Ahmadi press. So any sort of falsehood, any deception made by the Prophet ﷺ, by any of his newspapers, any of the followers, Al-Hakam at that time, and a few of the newspapers, if they record anything false, you can be certain that those who opposed the Jamaat wouldn't have excused that, and they would have raised a lot of awareness and public negativity around any false information, misinformation by Ahmadis and by the Prophet ﷺ. any incorrect coverage would have been the critics wouldn't have ignored it basically. So and also the Prophet Islam, he kept reminding people of the prophecy that he and his Jamaat, his true followers, would be protected. Um, and various people again were in the middle of mubahalas with the Prophet Islam at that time, so prayer duels. And throughout that period of 7 to 9 years, they would all one by one, they would all pass away from the plague. But again, Prophet Islam and his family and those in the Jamaat, they remained safe from the negativity of the plague. And with all the articles and all the awareness he was publishing, those who opposed him would continue to pray against him and oppose him, do what they could to try and malign him, but there was no success to any of this. I think the best evidence that Khalifa Rabi puts that in that period of 7 to 9 years, there's no single line or piece of evidence in any publication or article against the Jamaat saying that anything that Prophet Islam had said was false or incorrect, because you can be sure that any sort of falseness in anything that was said would have been made headline news, especially in India at that time. Again, in the Ahmadi press, it's a similar sort of thing. They would record all the deaths of all the people, and they would keep accurate records of Ahmadi numbers of people who had died in villages. And again, there was no comparison between the few Ahmadis who died versus the non-Ahmadis, many of whom were basically passed away very rapidly in that time. I think that in itself is reasonable evidence for any neutral person to say that there was a stark difference between non-Ahmadis and Ahmadis in terms of the statistics. Another proof is the rapid growth of the Jamaat in those years. So figures were again reported by Al-Hakam regularly, and from that period of about 7 to 9 years, in 1902, the number of Ahmadis has risen from about tens of thousands to around 100,000. 1904, we're looking around 200,000 Ahmadis, and 1906, it had surpassed about 400,000. So all in all, that in itself, I think for an open-hearted, reasonable person, would see that's a massive increase in a time where people were just dying in the numbers every single day. And then from another perspective, if you think, if the Prophet Islam, if his prophecy was false, then any Ahmadi at the time would have seen that his claim was false, that people in his family died, that people in the Jamaat died, and that would be a proof of his falsehood. And then any growth in the Ahmadiyyat would have stopped, and people would have left the Jamaat rather than running towards it. And then just coming towards the end now, again from chapter 32, verse 22, in that surely are signs for a people who reflect. So again, that verse from the Holy Quran, which talks about dabba, that insect, that animal that walks on the floors of the earth. It's a miracle in itself. Think about 1400 years ago, no one at that time had any idea about the reason for the spread of the plague. They were aware that there would be some sort of calamity around the time of Prophet Islam, but no one knew about the causes of it. They had no knowledge about rats, about infection, about bites, about fleas, which were actually the carriers of the disease, and that the bite of the flea would actually inject that virus into the bloodstreams of people. So again, this is for reasonable people. If the Quran was authored by a human, it wouldn't be possible that they could have predicted that the spread of the plague would have this specificity that would be done by the bite of an animal classified as the dabba 1400 years before it happened. We know now again that this animal, it was an insect, that it was the flea that was the cause of this. And again, this was prophesied in the Quran 1400 years ago. And the only question really to people opposing this prophecy, is it likely to be by accident? And if you're thinking statistically, it's very, very unlikely. So there was just a really quick run through from it. Jazakallah guys for listening to it again.
Jazakallah, it was really, really good, very detailed. It wasn't quick, but it was.
Tried to do it quickly. Tried to speed through.
It's almost impossible to do these topics quick because it's so detailed, but you could run through a lot of it. But yeah, Hamza, we're kind of through all the God's Summit topics, so one by one we'll get through them. Hopefully bring people closer to Allah, not further away. Inshallah. No, really good job, mashallah guys. We're going to come to an end now, so we'll save Khudd for next week, inshallah.